It's my pleasure to introduce John Weber from Zenith Insurance.
Thank you, Beth. I appreciate that. You know, it's not a regular occurrence for me to get up and speak in front of over 200 people, so this is going to be fun. I was sitting down at lunch a few minutes ago and sat down, and I really wanted to plan what I wanted to say, and then Nick Calloway sits down next to me, and then some other folks sat down and joined us, and they immediately started to congratulate him on the exceptional job he did introducing Luke Williams. So immediately the pressure turns to me, and I think Nick saw the look on my face. He says, well, let me give you some tips, John. And so I said, I appreciate that. He said one of the first things he did is he looked out over the audience and just visualized all of you as Zenith Insurance policyholders. He didn't actually say that, but he did give me some tips, which I appreciated, which goes to show you can, I've been in the business a little longer than Nick. You're never too old to learn. Appreciate that. But my name is John Weber. I'm the regional executive for Zenith Insurance here in Florida. And we first were introduced to this organization in 2019 by Nick Calloway. And it's been a great partnership. Beth is an exceptional leader. I've been very impressed with her all along. The tone starts at the top, and you see it every day that she operates and leads everyone. So really nice job, Beth, and thank you for having us all here. You know, I get a question every now and again, you know, what makes us different as an insurance company? We do workers' comp. And I will say one of the first things I would like to do is for somebody from Marriott to come out, put a small table up here so that Beth can put her raffle machine on the table and not bend over to pull those raffle balls out of there, bingo balls out. So maybe we can get that done, and my back was hurting just watching her bend over. But, you know, what makes us different as a company is that our employees truly do care. It's all of our own employees, and they care about making an impact on your clubs. We're the largest writer of country clubs in the state. We insure over 200. It's about half the clubs in the state, and we insure about a third of the members of the association. So if I do the math, I think there's some more out there that we can certainly bring on board, and you won't regret it. We produce the lowest loss ratios in the industry, and we do that with our people and your help and our agents' help, and that's our sole goal, to make sure that your costs are down, your injured workers get care, you have a safe work environment, and we do that as a team. You know, we've been over there in the workshop, and folks come up to us and say, man, you guys are fantastic, you're responsive, you do a great job. We love hearing that feedback, and that's what motivates us day in and day out. And I know that what motivates you when one of your members comes up and says, man, this is a phenomenal club. You want to keep getting better every single day, and that's what it's all about. So it's a pleasure to be here. It's great to be part of this organization. Feel free to stop by. I have Suzanne Loprior. She's our Assistant Vice President of Marketing. She's here with us. So she's actually very hands-on with the organization. Many people have met her. She goes out and she does new client orientations and really helps you get to know who we are as a company. But it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Andy Bernstein. Andy is the author of The Myth of Stress and Breaking the Stress Cycle, and the founder of the Resilience Academy. He teaches people a simple 7-step process that changes how you understand resilience and how you handle stress both at work and at home. And it comes, I guess, with no stigma or touchy-feeliness, which I'm anxious to hear about. And we're going to get to participate in this process and go through the 7 steps today, and we can experience it firsthand. Andy's clients include Google, GE, Johnson & Johnson, Patagonia, Merrill Lynch, Raymond James, and many other organizations, and hopefully Zenith Insurance one of these days. He's taught regularly at the Wharton Executive Education since 2007, where his classes are always among the highest rated sessions for senior leaders. I know that Andy's going to share more about his personal life and background in this session, but He lives in New York City. He has a wife and 2 young kids. And I hate to say this, I think he is a Yankees fan. They beat my Rays last night, which is starting to become a regular occurrence. But a fun fact is that he used to write for the Muppets. So please help me in welcoming Andy Bernstein to the stage.
Thank you. One other little fun fact that I actually have never said in years of speaking is that I grew up coming to Florida every winter. My step-grandfather, my mother's stepfather, his name was Jack Gaines, and is anyone here from Frenchman's Creek? I don't know if anyone's in the room, but so Frenchman's Creek in West Palm, he was a co-developer of that. And so I grew up coming down here to see my grandmother and the GM, the head golf instructor. Like, these were family that, you know, we knew well, and we saw when the clubhouse was being rebuilt or any of the major changes that took place at Frenchman's Creek over the years, we witnessed. And it never occurred to me that this would tie into anything I do professionally, but it's nice to kind of come full circle and meet the people who are really part of the success story at Frenchman's Creek. I'm going to share with you, and if anyone here knows anyone at Frenchman's Creek, please, you know, send them my regards. But I'm going to share with you the most important thing for happiness in life. If I were to ask you what the most important thing is, I'm sure you all have your personal experience and your thoughts about what matters most. Instead of starting with a different answer, I want to start with a different way of finding an answer, and that's using data. So I'd like to introduce you to the world's longest running study into happiness. And this is going to tie into more than just your own personal happiness. What we're going to cover today and tomorrow, because we're breaking it into 2 parts, is something that ties into your leadership ability, your team's performance, what matters most for team performance, relationships across the staff that you work with, your members' happiness, which we'll tie into as well, and then personal and family well-being. I'm going to start with that last one, personal happiness, because I think this is something that we all care about. I don't know anyone who doesn't want to live a happy life. So the most important thing for happiness, based on the world's longest study, the study is called the Harvard Grand Study. It's this 80-plus year study that began in 1938. The idea behind this was to take a bunch of sophomores at Harvard, measure them for a few years, and then see, based on the data, what actually correlates with happiness. The study never ended, so it continues today. Some of these kids who were 17 when they started participated well into their late 90s. A couple are still alive. And every 2 years, since they were teenagers, they completed these exhaustive surveys so that the scientists behind the study could look at the data and see what actually correlates with happiness over the entire adult span of our lives. If you're thinking, now hang on, here's this enormous question about human happiness. Isn't it a little biased just to be looking at men? Hopefully some of you are thinking that. It's actually much worse than that. It's just rich white Harvard men. So it's super duper biased. No one would create a study like this today, right? You've left out pretty much the entire world. But the bias works for the study in a funny way, because if you had included women, people of color, you would have introduced all sorts of variables that make it harder to figure out, was there discrimination, were there glass ceilings, what was the effect of this on their happiness? But in this case, these were a population that had nothing but tailwinds. And yet, some of them were measurably happier than others. So it makes it a little bit easier to ask why. Why is it that this group of rich white Harvard men is happier than this group? And the answer surprised the people behind the study. George Valiant ran the study for more than 30 years. He wrote this book on the left side of the screen, Triumphs of Experience. If you want to go deeper into the study and how it evolved, it's an interesting read. But I want to share the takeaways because they impact all of us and our strategies for living happy lives on a daily basis. It's easy to think that the things that resonate with us, that matter to us on a daily level, are going to show up in the data. But actually they don't. So health, as an example. There were healthy people in the study who were less happy. There were less healthy people who were happier. So even though if our health isn't great, we think, oh, if I only had better health. The truth is it's entirely possible to have excellent health and be miserable. And it's entirely possible to have less than ideal health and be happy. So health alone isn't the most important thing. It's nice to have. I'm not saying don't try to have it, but it's not the thing that matters most for your personal well-being. What about family? There were people in the study who had families who were less happy. There are people without families who were happier. If you spent the last few years in lockdown with your family like I did in New York City, that might not be news. Right? It's entirely possible to live a happier life without a family. So family alone isn't the thing that matters most based on the data. What about money? So money and happiness are correlated. This goes beyond the grand study. There are many studies that look at this relationship. But the relationship isn't as simple as you might think. If you can get out of poverty, if a family crosses the line out of the poverty line, so that's around $24,000 for a family in the US, as you cross that threshold, you get happier. And the relationship remains linear, so if you have $30,000 in income, $40,000, $50,000, you keep getting happier because it provides for food, clothing, medical needs, basic necessities. But when you get to around $75,000 in income, the relationship changes. Now you can get richer. You've got $100,000 in income, $1 million, $10 million. You're Jeff Bezos. You've got hundreds of billions of dollars. You don't keep getting happier. You get richer. But when Jeff Bezos' head hits the pillow at night, even though his pillow is made out of baby unicorn hair, available on Amazon, he's not any happier, at least not on account of his money. He's richer, he's got more toys, but it no longer translates to subjective well-being. The relationship decouples at around $75,000, $80,000 in income. What does make you happier changes. And I want to point out what that thing is, and then we're going to build on that in my time with you today, because it's surprising. It's not intuitive. It's not what our society may, dangle in front of us as a goal. I want to share the language that George Vaillant used in Triumphs of Experience to help capture what this thing is. Here's the most important thing. Here's what Vaillant wrote. There are two pillars of happiness. One is love. The other is finding a way of coping with life that does not push love away. I'll read that again. There are two pillars of happiness. One is love. The other is finding a way of coping with life that does not push love away. Both of these pillars matter. Love, not pushing love away. But I'm going to argue that as a tool in your toolkit and in the toolkit of the people you care about, the ability to not push love away matters more. And I'll show you why. Psychologists have recognized that our highs and lows in life are not symmetrical. They're not even. Think about this. Let's say you lose a few pounds. That's nice. You feel good. Let's say you gain a few pounds. Not only do you feel bad, you feel worse. You feel worse about the parts of your body you don't like than you feel good about the parts you do like, if there are any parts that you do like. They're not symmetrical. Here's another example. Your team members do what you want. That's nice. Your team members don't do what you want. It's a bigger charge. You get more frustrated with people who don't do the things you think they're supposed to do than you get pleased with the things that they should do. Last example. Your mother-in-law compliments you. That's nice. Your mother-in-law criticizes you. It's a bigger deal. You can spend weeks, months, or years cursing her. Or your father-in-law, or whoever it is, but mainly your mother-in-law. But the charge is not similar. I bet you can remember negative things that people said about you from your childhood, right? I can, Lance Corman, 5th grade. I can remember that. It's hard to remember positive things from a week ago. This is because of what psychologists call our negativity bias, where our brains are hardwired so that the downside, the negative reactions that we experience in life are stronger, they're stickier. They last longer. Because of this negativity bias, because of how easy it is for us to get angry or upset and stay angry or upset, these two pillars, love, not pushing love away, they both matter, but they don't matter equally. If you understand this asymmetry, what it points to is that what we need in life isn't more sunshine. We need a better way of clearing clouds. Right? So I'm not a motivational speaker. I don't live in a van down by the river, for those of you who remember. Right? The takeaway from this session is not going to be add more love. Because what would that even mean? Like I could say everybody go on date night, but then you get into a fight on the way home and it blows up the month. Because that fight on the way home has more impact in your relationship than the date night dinner has. So I'm not a motivational speaker saying you have to be more positive. What the data points out is we need to be less negative. We need to have a better toolkit for dealing with the challenges in our lives. That's how we stop pushing love away. Does that make sense so far? Okay, so the goal isn't to add sunshine, it's to subtract clouds. I'm going to use a word to refer to all of the negative emotions in our lives. I'm going to use the word stress. So stress, for our purposes, isn't just anxiety over getting things done. It's all the anger, frustration, heartbreak, sadness, worry, all of our negative emotions. I'm going to call stress. If you understand what the Harvard Grant study points to, this is an 80-year, $20 million and counting attempt to figure out what matters for our happiness. It points to this ability to not push love away. And you push love away when you're angry or upset or worried. I'm going to use the word stress. If you want to know how to stop pushing love away, we need to take a closer look at how stress works. So if we look in the dictionary will tell us that stress is a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or demanding circumstances. Does that ring true to you? It's in the dictionary, right? Smart people wrote that. Should ring true. Let's take a look at that. If we think about why stress would result from adverse or demanding circumstances, where would that have originated? Why would people experience stress in response to adverse circumstances? The story that we're told in any book on stress or resilience is consistent. The story is that once upon a time, our caveman and cavewoman ancestors were walking across the grassy plains, and then out jumps one of these, right? Saber-toothed tiger. And they had a response. Do you remember the name of this response? Call it out. Yeah, fight or flight. It's in our culture. The fight or flight response, right? That's this adrenaline, cortisol reaction to stressors like saber-toothed tigers. And back then it was a good thing because it liberates glucose, it makes you stronger, it makes you faster, better able to run. And so we survived. And over many generations, this gets strengthened. Tiger stress response, tiger stress response. And that's good. But then, we're told, everything changed. So now there are no longer any saber-toothed tigers. And instead we've got traffic and team dynamics and your mother-in-law and issues with your marriage and your kids and politics, polarization, your mother-in-law. And it's like we're surrounded by saber-toothed tigers. What we're told is that there's a mismatch between how our bodies evolved when this reaction was occasional and helpful. And now, the pace of life as we know it, it's constant and harmful. And we've become victims of our own biology. We can't change the 24/7 news cycle. We can't change the number of challenges in our lives on a daily basis. Our phone's going off. Even while you're here, it's going off. There's emails accumulating. All this stuff's happening. You can't change that. What you can do, we're told, is try to manage your stress by breathing or exercising and turning to various forms of stress management. That's a walking exercise. It's very popular. We might do it together. You're not going to eliminate stress. No one talks about stress elimination. We talk about stress management. You go for a run, you have a drink, you know you're going to have more stress tomorrow because somewhere in the back of your mind you think fight or flight has something to do with saber-toothed tigers and how we evolved and the pace of life. This is not a Florida concept. It's not an American concept. The whole world sees stress this way. But it is a recent concept. This entire idea of stress, stressors, stress management was built in the middle of the 20th century by one guy, this guy, an endocrinologist in Montreal named Hans Selye. Before Selye, nobody used the word stress. You can go back over 18th century literature, Shakespeare, the Bible, the book of Job. You don't see the word stress anywhere. The only place maybe you might find it is an engineering textbook. If someone's building a bridge, they might talk about load per unit area on those beams. Stress was a term from physics. Now you hear it every day, all around the world. It's not about physics, it's about our emotional well-being. This guy changed that. And the story of how one man almost single-handedly taught the whole world how stress works is a fascinating story you could write a book about, and I did. And it's right over there, so I'm not trying to sell you on the book. Everyone gets a copy of the book. I'm like Oprah, you get a book, not Carr, you get a book. Everybody gets a book. But you're not gonna read the book, so let me just tell you what's in it so that when you take it home, you would know. When your spouse says, well, what's that book? I don't know, but I can tell you a little bit. Here's what Selye did. He took a bunch of rats, and he exposed them to different stimuli. Heat, cold, exercise, starvation. He let the experiments run. And then he noticed that they all had the same reaction. They all had bleeding ulcers, enlarged adrenal glands, and shrunken spleens. He checked the literature. No one had ever said when you expose rats to all these different things, they have the same reaction. He thought about it. It makes no sense. These are very different things. Scientists knew that if you're exposed to heat, you could sweat. If you're exposed to cold, you could shiver. Those aren't connected. Selye believed he had discovered what he called a non-specific pathway that involved all these different stimuli. And he published a paper on this calling it the general adaptation syndrome in 1936, and nobody noticed. But then two things changed that for Selye in a big way. First, World War II unfolded, and anxiety around the world skyrocketed. People became very aware of their negative emotional states. And then, two psychiatrists in the Air Force wrote a book called Men Under Stress. That's the first time that word got used in a medical context, and it caught on. Selye realized if he could hook his theories into this stress thing that people were talking about, he could make a name for himself, and he was a very ambitious man. So he started publishing more than 1,700 articles and dozens of books with titles like The Stress of Life, Stress Without Distress. His autobiography was called The Stress of My Life. He wanted to own this word. And he traveled for 40 years like the Johnny Appleseed of stress, teaching the whole world. He spoke 7 or 8 languages. He taught the whole world stress is a function of adaptation, that it's inevitable in life because of how we evolved. Some stress is good for us. It can be a motivator, and the best we can do is manage our stress and cope. Raise your hand if that's roughly how you understand stress. Raise your hand. Yeah, even though you probably don't know the name Hans Selye, most of us don't, you all know his work because it was woven into every dictionary, every encyclopedia, and it's at the foundation of today's multi-billion-dollar stress management industry all around the world. I want to pause for a moment just to recognize how impressive an achievement it is that a research scientist working on rats in Canada can take his findings and promote them so they become a permanent part of global consciousness for billions of people. So that we all talk about stress today and stressors, which is a word Selye invented, and we all use this concept so frequently because of this one guy. It's an amazing achievement. The only downside to Selye's incredible success is it turns out he was wrong. Another researcher named John Mason, who was working at Walter Reed, saw Selye publishing article after article, book after book, but Mason realized Selye had overlooked something in his experiments. Mason repeated the experiments, but he controlled for something Selye didn't. He controlled for the trauma of the experiment itself. Here's why this matters. If you force a bunch of animals to exercise, and then you notice the stress response, that's what Selye did, and then he called exercise a stressor. He invented that word to describe things like heat, cold, exercise, your mother. Mason wanted to know, but what if you exercise hard by choice? Does that change anything? It actually changes everything. When animals exercise hard, but by choice, there is no hormonal cascade. There's activity, you may sweat, but these hormones don't become part of the process. So Mason wrote these brilliant papers explaining how Selye was wrong. Stress is not a physical process with psychological consequences. It's a psychological process with physical consequences. Selye had it backwards. But Selye refused to admit his error. And he had the first mover advantage. He had taught the whole world. Stress comes from stressors. It comes from the outside in. All we can do is manage it. So Mason's message got lost. So I want to help finish the job for John Mason and make clear that stress doesn't come from what's going on in your life. That's what I call the myth of stress. Stress is not a myth, but it doesn't come from things directly. It comes from our thoughts about things. And what that means is the stress is real. I'm not minimizing the stress in our lives. The stress is real. It's real. Our emotional reactions are real. But it doesn't come directly from the things. It comes from something in our thinking. And if you learn to think differently in the face of your real challenges, not only can you not experience stress, you can deal with those challenges much more effectively. Okay? So the antidote to stress is not relaxation. It's a shift in thinking. It changes your mindset. And when you learn to do this, and we're going to do this together, I'm going to teach you a way to do this, it changes the game on things that you experience stress around right now and the things that you would experience stress around in your future and in your kids' lives and your kids' futures. It's a totally different door to walk through. So I want to help you learn to do this because the payoff isn't just less stress, it's a happier life. You stop pushing love away. You need to realize that the tigers in your lives aren't directly in your lives now. They're in your thoughts about your lives. It doesn't look like this. It looks like a very specific kind of thinking. Like, my spouse should appreciate me more. My kids should listen to me. I should be in better shape. My team should be stronger. The country should be going in a different direction. The more of these thoughts you have, the more stress you experience. This is an actual MRI. This person could have $1 billion and be on a beach in Bora Bora, they're still going to experience stress because it's not about your money or your surroundings. It's about thoughts like these. This person can have a drink and will feel better because the alcohol affects your brain's ability to think these thoughts. Same thing with exercise, breathing, meditation. Brain chemistry is real. But when your bloodstream returns to normal, you have the same thoughts, and so the stress returns. This is why stress management is only effective temporarily. If instead of drinking or in addition to drinking, you learn to think differently, something changes the way that these thoughts stick in your brain or makes them not stick. The more you do this, the more a change takes place in your mindset. This person doesn't need $1 billion and a beach in Bora Bora to live a happier life, because remember, those things aren't correlated with long-term happiness. This person stops pushing love away. They stop fighting with their spouse, they stop fighting with their kids, they stop fighting with their team, they listen in a different way, they build relationships in a different way, they experience challenges in a different way. This person stops pushing love away, okay? And that, according to the longest study we have, that's the most important thing for our personal happiness. We see this in end-of-life studies. If you ask people who lived very long lives to look back, what's the thing that you wish were different? They don't say, I wish I had skinnier thighs, I should have had a six-pack. They don't say that. They say, I wish I'd been better at apologizing. I wish I had known then what I know now about what really matters to me. I wish I'd stayed close to my kids when they made that choice, or my siblings when we disagreed. We're wired for these close connections to the tribe that we go through life with. And anything that weakens that, we pay the price for, especially as we get older. So if I can, guess what older future you would say to you now, sitting here in this room, it's not just about achieving your financial goals or climbing the ladder within the club. It's about recognizing the real dynamics of your well-being and learning to build the skills now while you still have time to use them that can make a difference. So I want to teach you a way to do this. It's not the only tool in your toolkit, but it can supplement the ones that you have. And the key to doing this drives your happiness, it drives your health, you age more slowly, you have an easier time getting in shape or staying in shape. It'll change the way that you relate to your team and your family, and it boosts performance. Part of why I teach through Wharton and I work with Fortune 100 leaders across the country, sure, they care about health and happiness, but what they really care about is performance. There's a strong correlation between mindset and performance. Poor performers live on the left side of this spectrum, experiencing friction and burnout. But the best performers don't. They experience what psychologists call flow. Not passive, actively facing challenges with a different head on your shoulders. If you're successful and stressed out, you're succeeding in spite of your stress, not because of it. You don't want stress as your fuel source. You want flow. The more you have, the better. And if you want to see a room full of people with flow, hang out with toddlers. Little children have flow as their background state. Even in poverty in a war zone, you would see little kids playing with sticks. In the moment, they're happy. As we get older, our thinking starts to change, and this needle begins to move. But in this model, happiness isn't something you seek ahead of you by getting more money, more cars, because you know people with more. They're not any happier. It's about having less of the thinking that divides you from the people you care about. That's the key, according to this study. So I'll share with you a way of doing this. The key, this was a personal journey for me. I'll share briefly something about my background. I grew up in New York City. I'm actually not a big Yankees fan, if that helps you like me more. But I grew up in New York City with a lot of privilege and opportunity. Park Avenue, and I had a happy childhood. When I was a teenager, things changed. When I was 14, my father died unexpectedly, and then when I was 16, my little sister died in a car accident. I'm not trying to depress you or overshare. What happened for me was this needle snapped. And at a relatively young age, I started asking big questions about life. I remember saying to my mother, how do I go back to living a happy life? I remembered being happy. I had no idea how to be happy again. And she didn't know. So I kept asking these questions. After college, I spent my 20s exploring self-help processes to try to figure out how do I deal with this stuff. I explored so many things, traditional, alternative, Eastern, Western, legal, and trying to see, it's all becoming legal now, trying to see what's the best practice for dealing with crap in life. I sold a screenplay to the Muppets and moved to California as a screenwriter. I met a woman there named Byron Katie, who's a best-selling self-help author. I loved what she was doing. She had a process that moves this needle. I stopped working for the Muppets. I became one of the directors of her company. I was going to help people get her work. My friends have gone into the working world, financial services. They didn't get it. It was too California, touchy-feely, they thought. And I realized moving this needle doesn't have to be clinical. It doesn't have to be spiritual. I had an idea for another way of coming at it. I left her company in 2004 and created a process that in my mind was just practical. 7 steps done on paper. You don't even have to speak. These 7 steps produce in your mind the same thing that happens whenever you have a breakthrough. I use the word insight for this. Insight is the light bulb that goes on when you struggle with something and then suddenly see it through new eyes. It's one of the most powerful tools for real change because it's a complete shift in your thinking. It's also one of the most rare because you don't know how that light bulb went on or how to make it happen again the next time. It tends to be a passive experience. So the worksheet that I created is called Active Insight. It's a way of turning that light bulb on demand and producing insights. And you have the worksheet. You have the worksheets on your table. So it looks like this. If you don't have it, grab one. They're on the end, I think, or raise your hand. Maybe we can pass them around. We're going to do this. First, I'm going to tell you a story so you can see what this looks like because it's counterintuitive. But then we're going to do it together, and then we're going to build on that. In part 2, we're going to go deeper into this. You don't, just like I don't compare this to therapy as much as I compare this to going to the gym. You know that in order for a change to take place in your physical body and your physical fitness, you can't just think about going to the gym, and you can't just go to the gym and sit there, right? You've got to actually provoke a very specific response in your body. The same thing is true for mental fitness, for your happiness. It's not about positive thinking or affirmations. What we want to do with this process is provoke a very specific change, not in your body, but in your thinking, in your mind. And these steps help do that. They're going to flip a switch in your thinking without touchy-feeliness, without stigma. You don't have to say anything. I don't care about your childhood, it's not that I don't care, but I'm not going to ask you about your childhood or your dreams. I don't need to know any of that. You just move your mind through these steps and something changes. I want to tell you a story so you can see it in action, and then we're going to, because it's confusing at first, and then we're going to do it so you can feel it, and then in part 2, we're going to go a little bit deeper so you can start to master this and feel for yourself how this can change your marriage or your team or some issue in your community that maybe has been keeping you up at night. But let's start with just an overview of the general dynamics. If you were doing this, you were going to just take something that bothers you. Don't do this now. I don't want you to do it on paper yet. I just want you to follow along on the screen. And you would write something on the lines of step 1 using the words should or shouldn't. For example, my spouse should appreciate me more, or I should be in better shape, or our country should be less divided, or he shouldn't have died. Now, when I say that one, hopefully you're thinking, hang on, that's not stress. That's trauma. This is a major life event. To continue my analogy to working out, some of the challenges in our lives are like heavy lifts, okay? So you don't walk into a gym and lift 1,100 pounds. This is the actor who played the Mountain in Game of Thrones. He broke the world record for deadlifting not long ago. That's not his first time doing this, right? He spent a lot of time in the gym building muscles to lift a weight that heavy. Some of the challenges in our lives are like heavy lifts. So sexual abuse, death, homicide, race, I might put politics on there today. We're not going to do this today. I don't want to freak anybody out. We're not taking on your biggest challenge. We would need more time. But I also want you to know I work on all these things. I do a whole workshop for survivors. I do a whole workshop on discrimination. I do a lot of work that helps people see the other side of disagreements, even fundamental and big disagreements, but not, when you've had there's a pool outside and you're waiting for your cocktails, and today is not the day for this, okay? We're not going to do this today. But I can plant a seed so you can start to see how this could have value in your life after we're done. We're going to start with the beginner topic. And the topic I'm going to show you first is how this can apply in relationships. I'm going to tell you a story of a woman I grew up with. Her name's not really Lisa. That's not really her picture. But it's a real story, true story. Lisa got married right out of college. She had 3 kids. 15 years into her marriage, it was falling apart. This is an example of pushing love away that's relatable for all of us. If you've ever been in a breakup or a divorce, I want to show you how this process changed things for Lisa, and then we're going to do it on something in your life. But Lisa, I said we grew up together, I ran into her, how are you? Not good. Why? What's going on? Andy, my marriage is a disaster. We're getting divorced. I shouldn't have married him. The first step in this process is to take something you experience as stressful and write it on the lines of step 1. She wrote, I shouldn't have married him. In step 2, I said, how strongly do you feel that belief to be true? On a scale from 0 to 10, 10 being the most, that was a 10. She was really sure that she shouldn't have married him. See if you can put yourself in Lisa's shoes, just to feel how this process works. In step 3, I asked Lisa, how do you feel when you think this? You think you shouldn't have married him. What feelings come with that? There's a list of feelings on the worksheet. She just circled angry, embarrassed, frustrated, and she wrote in regretful, sad, and ashamed. You're just tracking your emotions. When you're feeling these feelings, Lisa, what do you do? In 3B, there's a list of behaviors. She said that's when she would complain, cry, yell, and treat her husband badly in front of the kids. Treating her husband badly in front of the kids was the red flag for Lisa, where she realized she doesn't want to be that person. But it's not a choice. It's coming from how she's feeling. And the feelings aren't a choice. They're coming from what she's thinking. So far, there's no change. We just see, this is what I think. I shouldn't have married him. This is how I feel. This is what I do. The next 2 steps are where the change take place. This next step is called the negation. It's a little confusing. Let me show you a visual for why we do this. This is you. You're the decapitated head. You're going through life. You're experiencing flow. Everything is awesome. And then it stops. The world would say your flow was disrupted by this thing that just happened. In Lisa's case, with her husband. But that's not actually what takes place. Things happen, and then you have a thought. And when that thought sticks, it's like you leave flow and you pull into this contracted space. In Lisa's case, I shouldn't have married him. For someone else, it could be we should be closer. For someone else, it could be they should appreciate me more. The size varies, the dynamics vary. The size varies. It can be big, it can be small, but the dynamics do not vary. Anytime you've ever experienced any negative emotion, your mind did this thing first. It has to. You don't walk down the street and get struck by emotions. You walk down the street and have a thought about your relationship, your kids, your parents, the challenge in your life, and the emotions follow. And again, you can manage your stress, but the emotions, you're still contracted. So with Lisa, what we're going to do is challenge the thinking that brought us here. We do this in this next step so that we can release the mind back to flow and reality. This isn't stress management. This is something different. Here's how we do it. We take our original thought and we're going to add in reality to the beginning of it. We flip the main verb. Should becomes shouldn't, shouldn't becomes should. We add at this time or at that time at the end. I'll give you some examples. I should be in better shape becomes, in reality, I should not be in better shape at this time. I added in reality at the beginning. I flipped should to should not. I added at this time at the end. That might sound strange. That's how we do it. Help me with this one. They should listen to me. What's the first part? In reality. What's the second part? They should not listen to me. And the third part? At this time is very important. We're not saying they're never going to listen to me. It is what it is. That's not where this goes. In reality, they should not listen to me at this time. Help me with this one. I shouldn't have married him. What's the first part? In reality. What's the second part? I should have married him. The third part's a little different because we're going back in time, but you can do it. At that time. Very good. In reality, I should have married him at that time. I asked Lisa to write that down on the lines of step 4. That's called the negation. In reality, I should have married him at that time. And then in step 5, I said, Lisa, can you think of any proof or evidence for why in reality you should have married him at that time? And she said, nope. No, shouldn't have married him. Stupidest thing I've ever done. I'm going to regret this until the day I die. If I had said, Lisa, tell me why you shouldn't have married him, that would not have been hard for her. She'd have gone on for days. She'd been going on for months. She also would have continued experiencing anger, treating her husband badly in front of the kids, pushing love away. So you get a choice here. Lisa gets a choice, and you'll get the same choice. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be happy? You get to pick one. If Lisa wanted to be right, she could spend the rest of her days saying, I shouldn't have married him. And she'd get to be right. Her friends would say she's right. If they didn't, they wouldn't be her friends for very long. I got to be right. My father shouldn't have died. My sister shouldn't have died. The whole world agreed with me. I was totally right. I was also totally miserable. And eventually I was so tired of feeling bad, something rare happened. I became willing to challenge my own thinking. We challenge other people's thinking all the time, but challenging your own thinking, is that even a thing? It turns out it's a kind of magic move if you experience stress. If you can challenge your own perspective on the issue, it unlocks a door that might otherwise never open. You don't have to do this, and no one can make you do this. You can go to your deathbed saying, I shouldn't have married him. But if you're looking for a shortcut to feel peace of mind again, to have an insight, this next step gives you away. And I'm going to give you one last little teaching tool for today that helped Lisa that can help you. It's something I call relative peak intelligence, which describes the fact that at any given moment, everyone is making the most intelligent choice they're capable of at that point in time. That may sound wrong, because people do stupid things every day. But it's not stupid in their mind when they do it. When they do it, they think, this makes sense. A minute later, they might say, that was really stupid. But if you went back a minute, in that moment, not only is it their peak intelligence, it's the peak intelligence based on where, it's not absolute peak intelligence, it's relative to their life, based on all their life experience to date. In that moment, they're making what they think is the smartest choice. You might make a smarter choice if your relative peak intelligence is higher. But wherever they are in their timeline, they're still doing what makes the most sense to them. No one ever says, I know a better way to deal with this. I'm not going to use that. No one's an idiot in their own mind, right? No one says, like, I've got a much better solution for this relationship issue, this team issue, this business issue, but forget about that. I'm going to go like this. No one does that. In the moment, we're always using relative peak intelligence. Now, it can change and grow over time. The relative peak can increase. But I said to Lisa, instead of looking at yourself at 22 on the altar, marrying this guy, and telling me why you shouldn't have married him, why you were stupid to marry him, tell me why you should have married him at that time. What was the relative peak intelligence? Why did you marry him? She thought about it. And she said, well, I guess in reality, I should have married him at that time because I liked the idea of getting married before my friends did and being one step ahead. This was just Lisa. She always wanted to do stuff first. She thought about it some more, and she said, also in reality, I should have married him at that time. Not today. She wouldn't do it today, but at that time, because he was kind to my sister, and I remember thinking he was a good person. Lisa has a little sister with special needs. She'd watch when she brought a guy home. What does he do? Is he a jerk? And she said, I could remember he was so sweet to my sister that I thought, I could marry this guy. And she said, in reality, I should have married him at that time because he lived downtown and seemed sophisticated and different from the guys I dated in college. And I felt hurt when my ex-boyfriend got married, and I wanted to get married too. So we're not going for noble. This is not an exercise in looking good. This is an exercise in getting real. It's not for everyone. But Lisa was ready. She thought about it some more. In reality, I should have married him at that time because he had a strong work ethic and was very smart, and that mattered to her. And I wanted to have children right away while I was still young. In reality, I should have married him at that time because my parents got married young, and I thought that was just what you did. In reality, I should have married him at that time because I thought the early warning signs of our mismatch were normal and that I would be able to resolve them easily. In reality, I should have married him at that time because I didn't have any sense of what really makes a marriage work over time. I was 22. And seeing clearly who I was then, we were actually a good match. It changed later, but in reality, and at that time, he really was exactly what I wanted. Can you hear what happened inside Lisa's head? She came into this, I shouldn't have married him. That's a 10. She looked at, in reality, I should have married him at that time. You can't hold both. This one negates this one. That's why it's called the negation. The more she saw this, the more this one releases. Lisa could live to be 100, and she could look back on her life and say, okay, I see why I should have married him at that time. I see what I didn't know, who I was. But you don't want to wait to be 100 to have that insight, because that's a lot of anger, frustration, sadness, and pushing love away. And yet for most of us, that's what happens if we wait passively for that light bulb to go on. Lisa had this insight at 37, so she could see the truth then, make completely different changes as her relative peak intelligence went up, and then make completely different choices with her next relationship. So when she had this insight, something shifted in her thinking. She didn't let go, she didn't accept, she didn't justify, she wasn't rationalizing. She was seeing the truth. This is an exercise about seeing the truth more fully and recognizing that stress always reveals a kind of blind spot. If Lisa thinks she shouldn't have married the guy who she actually married, she has a blind spot. So the antidote to stress isn't relaxation, it's insight, which these steps help you provoke in just 15 minutes without saying a word. The change shows up in how you feel. In 6A, Lisa says she felt clear, honest, and understanding. and in how you then take action as a result. She could accept the truth, she could forgive, she could stop blaming him. She still divorced the guy, but instead of getting divorced angrily from the guy she shouldn't have married, she got divorced amicably from the guy she should have married at that time, and she completely changed her list for the next guy. That's how relative peak intelligence works. Okay? And the last step, I said, Lisa, you shouldn't have married him. That was a 10. How true is that? And she said, no. I mean, given who I was and what I knew or didn't know, it's a 1. You can measure the amount of insight that you have. We're not all going to go from 10 to 1 on our first worksheet. Lisa had done this. She was a therapist. She'd done stuff like this before. But this ability to challenge our thinking and provoke insights pays dividends across our lives. Now, some of the challenges in our lives, I'm going to continue to compare them to heavy lifts. We're not going to do them on day 1. But the more we do this, the more we build this skill, and the more we start to feel the benefits that come from it. Does that make sense so far? Any questions about that? I see, no, okay. So I want us to do this in our remaining time. I want you to kick the tires and feel what it feels like to engage these muscles. Because we all know what it feels like to go for a walk or a run, to lift weights, to ride a bike. We have a lot of models for mental fitness in our lives that we've tried. But for physical fitness, but for mental fitness, for moving these mental gears, many of us have never done it. And I want us to experience this so you can see what it feels like to drive the thing that matters most for happiness according to the world's longest study. So here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to pick the worksheet topic for us to do together. So for our first worksheet as a group, instead of you choosing your own, tomorrow you'll get to choose your own when we do part 2, but today I'm going to choose the topic for you. And the topic I'm going to choose is they should see it my way. You get to choose the they. So I want you to think of someone in your life who you think should see things your way. It could be someone at work, it could be someone sitting next to you. If you came here with a colleague, you need to separate yourselves a little bit. It could be someone at home. It could be someone, but I don't want you to pick someone in like politics or on the national stage because I want it to be someone in your actual life who you know. Think of somebody who you think, yeah, they should see it my way, right? A spouse, an ex-spouse, a teenager, a parent-in-law. Pick someone. Raise your hand if you can think of someone who should see things your way. Raise your hand. Some hands are going up fast. Raise your hand if you can think of someone who should see things your way. Raise your hand if you can't. Raise your hand if no matter what I say, you're not going to raise your hand. So, what am I, kindergarten? I'm not raising my hand. Okay, so assuming that you can all think of someone, think of that person, and then I want you to write on the lines of step 1, blank should see it my way. Blank should see it my way. You can fill in the blank. Peter, Tom, my mother, my son. Blank should see it my way. But the rest of it should stay the same. It is not a spectator sport. You're not going to get any value watching the rest of us change our lives. Just like going to the gym. You don't go to the gym and watch, I hope. I want you to get a mental workout here, okay? If there's any part of you that cares about living a happy life and passing this on to your loved ones, kick the tires here with me. Blank should see things my way. Blank should see it my way. Don't do off-road, like, oh, I should weigh less. No, we're not doing that one, okay? We're all going to do this one together. Blank should see it my way. Right? Blank should see it my way. And don't feel like you've got to save the worksheet. I'm going to give you the PDF. You can print 1,000,000. This is my only worksheet. You're getting more worksheets. So I want you to do it on paper, okay? Not in your head. Blank should see it my way. Step 2, how strongly do you feel this belief to be true? If you're being honest, you think they should see it your way, and they don't. Would you give it a 7, an 8, a 9, a 10? What number would you give it? Circle the number that rings true for you, and then just call it out. Let's make this a little interactive. What are you circling? 10, 7, 12? Did someone say 12? The Spinal Tap worksheet goes to 11. If you're a 6 or higher, raise your hand. 6 or higher, raise your hand. 6 or higher. 5 or lower? Now the 6s and higher are staring at you like, you're a 5? Seriously? You can't compete? That's fine. We're going to do other ones later. But most of you are 6 or higher, so good. I mean, not good, but you're doing it the right way. So we're going to work on this. In 3A, how do you feel when you think about this? You think they should see things your way. They don't. What feelings come with that? Look at the list of feelings on the screen, and then circle the ones that resonate for you. So if you feel angry, you circle angry. If you feel annoyed, circle annoyed. Circle the ones that resonate for you. See if you can find at least 3. Also, people in the back, if you don't have a worksheet, please come up and take one from some table if it's just sitting around, okay? Or get it from, because again, it's not a spectator sport. I want you to get, there are worksheets around the room. I can tell you I've done this many times, and what people say afterwards is, I'm glad I actually did the worksheet, I didn't want to, but doing the worksheet makes a difference, okay? It's intended to be undone on paper. How do you feel? Call out some things that you feel in 3A. What are you circling? Just call them out. Impatient, annoyed, frustrated, resentful. Okay, see if you can find at least 3. When you're feeling resentful, annoyed, frustrated, in 3B, what do you do? How do you act? Is that when you preach? Do you complain? Do you drink? Do you fight? Do you pull away? Do you find fault with them? Look over the list and just take a minute to see which ones resonate. See if you can find at least 3. Circle the whole thing, save time. What are some things that we do? What do we do, Floridians? Call them out. Give up, shut down, lose sleep, argue. Any others? Blame. Yeah. I'm not asking you to like it. I don't want you to be proud. I just want you to be honest. This is what I do. I think they should see it my way. I feel angry, annoyed. I preach, I blame, I have an extra drink. Right? This is what we do. So far, no change. We're just building some honesty here. The next 2 steps are where the change take place. And I want to just manage expectations. This is a workout. This is going to be hard. If you'd never worked out before and you never heard of anybody working out and you went to the gym and you worked out and you hurt the next day, you'd be like, what the hell, something's wrong with me. Something's wrong with this whole process. But you don't say that because you know, right? You know, no pain, no gain. You know that you've got to break down the muscle to create this. This next step, step 4 and 5, I don't want to say it's going to hurt, but it requires you to stretch in a way that's uncomfortable at first. So I want you to be willing to do this with me. And if you're open to doing this, remember we're going to add in reality at the beginning. We're going to flip the main verb. We're going to add at this time at the end. So they should see it my way. What's the first part? In reality. Very good. What's the second part? They should not see it my way in the third part. At this time is really important. You're going to write on the lines of step 4, in reality, blank should not see it my way at this time. In reality, blank should not see it my way at this time. And if it feels wrong and backwards and traitorous and harmful and dangerous, good. It's a good sign because it means you put your finger on the core of this contraction in your own mind. And your stress isn't coming from them. It's coming from your thoughts about them, and this is where we go to the basement to try and deal with the source of the problem in our thinking, okay? So you write that down, and then we're going to work. This is it. We're going to lift. We're going to do some mental weightlifting here. It's only going to last a few minutes, but I want you to do it with me if you can, okay? So this is the most important step in this process. It's the hardest, but it's the one that pays dividends if you can do it with me. We're going to look for proof for why in the real world, not in your mind, according to your beliefs, but why in the real world, they shouldn't see it your way just at this time, not tomorrow. We're not negating our goals. We still want them to see it our way tomorrow. But I want you to imagine that we hit a button and time stops. And in this frozen moment, you're going to pull your mind high above the world and you're going to look down. You're going to see them way down there, the person you're writing about. And you're going to see you way down there. We'll come back to you in a second. But looking first at them, why is it true in the real world that you're looking at from high above that they shouldn't see it your way just at this time? Why don't they see it your way? What are the constraints that keep them seeing it their way? For example, if I can see that they've had different past experiences than I have, and that's cultivated a different point of view so far, I'm going to write, in reality, they should not see it my way at this time because they've had different past experiences than I have. I don't have to like it. I'm not trying to accept it. But I can see it as a factor in why they see things their way and not my way so far. I'm going to write that down on the lines of step 5. And then I'm going to ask myself, why else should they not see it my way at this time? Why don't they? What are the other factors or constraints? I want to give you 30 seconds to see if you can find any proof, to move your mind to find anything that proves why in the real world they shouldn't see it your way just at this moment. See what you can come up with, write it down, and then I'll make some suggestions. But I want to give you a chance to try this. Even if you fail, I want you to try. Why don't they see it your way? Where are they coming from? What are the factors in place? If you were to get good at this, if you were to invest in this as a skill, the way that you've gotten good at so many other things in your lives, you would sit down with a blank sheet of paper, you'd ask yourself what's wrong with this world, what's wrong with this picture, with your life. You'd start writing shoulds. He should listen to me, she should appreciate me more, I should be in better shape. You just make a list of your complaints. You'd pick one, you'd go through these steps, and when you get to this step, you might spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you might get a glass of water or wine or scotch, whatever it is and you just sit with this step and you stretch your mind and look for proof. And the better you get at it, the more it changes your marriage, your relationship to your kids, your team. But at first, it's like a workout you've never done before. It's hard, it seems impossible, it may even seem stupid. So I'm going to help show you how these steps look in context when someone does it. And I'm going to read to you some suggestions, some coaching suggestions, and put them on the screen. What I'd like you to do is just to take them in. As I read each suggestion to you, take it in, and see if it's true in your life with the person you're thinking of. If it is, I want you to write it down. So if you're like, oh yeah, I want you to write it down, to physically add it to your worksheet, okay? Don't just let it stay in your head. But think about it, it's your worksheet. In reality, they should not see it my way just at this time, in this frozen moment, because they have different priorities or values than I do. If you can see their priorities or values are different than yours, maybe their culture is different, their generation is different, something has made their values different than yours, their upbringing is different, I want you to recognize that on paper as a factor in why they shouldn't see it your way yet. Look for that. I'm not asking you to accept it or like it or approve of it. I'm just asking you to see it. In reality, they should not see it my way at this time because they believe that the consequences of seeing things my way would be negative. Now, you don't. You think the consequences of seeing things their way would be way more negative, probably. But we're not looking at you. We're getting out of your head and into theirs. And if their way of seeing is that your way is negative, would be worse for them or for the world, I want you to recognize that. Even if they're wrong, I just want you to recognize that. In reality, they should not see it my way at this time because people they trust also see it their way. We tend to think of people we disagree with as being like lone wolves or going rogue, thinking this is the only person who sees things so backwards. But in most cases, there's someone influential in their life who sees it the same way and reinforces it. And it's very hard for us to challenge the thinking of the group that we identify with. So I just want you to look for that. Is there some influence in their life that sees things the same way they do? That would be part of why they should still see it their way, not yours. In reality, they should not see it my way at this time because it's possible my way of seeing things is incomplete or wrong. Maybe not true, but is it possible? Have you ever been wrong before? You thought you were, you actually weren't. Right? Just look for this. Just consider, are you open to the possibility that maybe your way of seeing things is missing something? If so, I want you to write that down. In reality, they should not see it my way at this time because I've polarized the situation by preaching, yelling, or withdrawing. If you go back to 3B and you see yell, argue, fight, or pull away, give up, withdraw, can you recognize that part of why they shouldn't see things your way right now may stem from some actions on your part in the past, even if your part is small? Can you recognize that? Can you hold yourself as accountable as you think they need to? And see how hard that is for all of us. In reality, they should not see it my way at this time because I'm not presenting my way in terms that tie into their values and goals. People don't change their minds because you overpower them with your facts and logic. or your values and goals. They change their mind when you tie what you want them to believe into their values and goals. Can you see how that might be true in your case? In reality, they should not see it my way this time because I'm not sincerely listening and understanding their concerns so that they feel heard and might be open to really listening to me. The first step in changing hearts and minds is listening, in giving space for someone else to speak their side. They may then give you space to share your side. But if you're not giving them that space, either through a lack of interest or skill, can you see how that may have an impact on the relationship as it stands today? Can you be honest about that? Remember I said a little earlier, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? You get to pick one. If you want to be right, you can. They should see it your way. You're right, they're wrong, screw them. We can spend our whole lives feeling that way. But we pay the price for that, especially as we get older and we see these relationships weaken. This is asking you to see something else and to realize that in their mind, they think that they're right. And there may be ways that we can help change their minds if we can come from greater understanding. We're still sticking to our beliefs, but from greater understanding, humility, compassion, and then presenting a more persuasive argument. If you do this, what happens is the statement that seemed crazy at first, what do you mean in reality they should not see it my way at this time? It starts to seem more true. Remember I said insight is the realization that what you thought was true is actually false. They should see it my way. Well, in the real world, if they don't see it your way, they shouldn't see it your way yet. Because something that would have had to have happened to help them see it your way hasn't happened. Or at least it hasn't happened effectively or enough. So they shouldn't see it your way yet. We're not justifying it, we're understanding it. And when that happens in this step, a change takes place. We're not letting go of anything, we're not rationalizing anything. Sometimes in the very beginning, people will say, oh, well, you're just rationalizing. You're just rationalizing why they don't. But if I drop this, I don't know if you can see this. Now, if I drop this, well, that shouldn't have fallen. That water bottle shouldn't have fallen. Well, in reality, it should have fallen at this time. Why? Gravity, it has mass, we're on Earth, I let go. You're just justifying what happened, Andy? No, I'm not justifying what happened, I'm explaining what happened. Gravity, mass, Earth, those aren't justifications. That's the truth, that's physics. It's not rationalizing. If this person doesn't see it your way and you think they should see it your way, you're not seeing the truth. In reality, they shouldn't see it your way yet. Not at this time. Different parents, different upbringing, different values, different priorities. You haven't helped them. Maybe you've gotten angry. That's not justifying it. It's helping you see the truth, just like the water bottle. If I think the water bottle shouldn't have fallen, I'm confused. I have a blind spot. I don't understand how water bottles work and how gravity works. If I think they should see it my way and they don't see it my way, I'm confused. I don't understand how our minds work and how persuasion works. And this helps us correct that. The change takes place when we see the truth more fully. A change takes place in how we think. We can't go back to, well, they should see it my way. If we actually moved mentally and we see that in the real world they shouldn't yet, a change takes place. The blind spot starts to slightly, in some cases, slightly reduce. In other cases, just goes away. You see the truth. And it shows up in step 6A, where we feel something different as a result of the insight. For those of you who had an insight, and I know the first worksheet is hard, I'm going to tell you some stories in a second so you can see it. But for those of you who had an insight, with the person in your head, can you connect to any of these feelings in 6A? And if so, which ones? Look over the list in 6A, circle the ones that resonate for you. And call them out. Can you connect to any of these? Calm, tolerant, relieved. Any others? Understanding. When you're feeling calm, tolerant, relieved, understanding, what can you do in 6B to drive change? You still want them to see it your way. We're not giving up. We're not becoming passive. We still want them to see it our way. But what can you do from insight and understanding instead of from anger and frustration? Look over the list in 6B and circle the ones that resonate for you. And tell me what you're circling. What are you circling? Communicate. What? Approach. Any others? Prioritize. Any others? Accept. Listen. You may reach out to the person. In fact, if you were circled communicate and you had a real insight, my invitation to you is to make this real and to reach out to the person later today or sometime this week and say, don't say I did a worksheet on you. That doesn't help anybody. Right? Don't do that. Can we talk about something? It's important to me that we see things the same way. I know that we don't. Can you share with me your concerns? What am I not getting? Can I share with you mine? They should see it my way can't do that. It starts a fight. In reality, they should not see it my way at this time, can have a dialogue. And the paradox is you're much more likely to help them see things your way from that space of dialogue than you are from the space of argument and fight. So I encourage you to reach out to the person and say, you know what, I'd like to hear your side of this, and just listen and see if you can see what they say. The last step, I want you to rate your original statement, not the negation. They should see it my way. It was a 7, it was a 10, it was a 12 for somebody. But how true is that? Not how true would you like it to be tomorrow. How true is it in the real world? Given what they know or don't know, what number would you give it? Circle the number that resonates for you. How true is it really, given what they know or don't know, what you and others have done or not done? And call out some numbers. What do you have? 3? What did you start at? 10? Anyone else? 2? Who said 2? What did you start at? 7? Who went down from step 2 to step 7? Raise your hand if you went down. Raise your hand if you went down. Raise your hand if you went up. It was a 10, now it's a 20. Thanks, Beth. That was great. Really appreciate the speaker. That can happen the first worksheet because it's confusing and I'm asking you to move muscles that for some of us we've never really moved. But let me just share with you 2 quick stories so you can see what this looks like. There's a gentleman who said, Andy, my mother-in-law shouldn't criticize me. That's a 10. It's always going to be a 10. It's never not a 10. Your process isn't going to change that. It's just the truth. He gets to step 5. In reality, she should criticize me at this time. How's that helpful? I said, you tell me. It's not advice. It's not therapy. You lift your own weights. He thought about it and he's like, well, okay, in reality, she should criticize me at this time. She's from a different culture. She's from a different generation. She thinks she's being helpful. I said, what's an example? Oh, she says things like, it's cold outside. The kids should be wearing jackets. I said, well, what was the truth? Oh, yeah, it was cold outside. The kids should be wearing jackets. She was totally right. So was that criticism? She told you the truth. He thought about it. He's like, she's never actually criticized me. She just tells me the truth in this tone that I don't appreciate. Wrote that down. Well, what happens when you talk to her about that? Never said a word. I don't want to start a fight. So in reality, she should criticize me at this time. Different culture, different generation, thinks she's being helpful. She's actually right. She cares about the kids, and I've never talked to her about it. He's like, oh, sits down with his wife and her mother. We love you. We value your place in our family. Sometimes you say things and we feel judged as parents. Can we talk about how we communicate? It's not about a piece of paper. It's about an insight, a very different kind of conversation, and a whole family that stops pushing love away as a result. We say things like, well, time heals all wounds. This guy was 27 years, this guy hated his mother-in-law. Time doesn't heal our wounds. It's insight that heals our wounds. And we can make insight happen now if we're serious about living a happier life. Another example, a gentleman said, Andy, my daughter and I should be closer. I don't want to negate that. That's really important to me. He gets to step 5. In reality, we should not be closer at this time. I said, you tell me. He says, well, okay. In reality, we should not be closer at this time because I just got divorced from her mother. She's 16, not her mother. The daughter is 16. I moved out of the house. I see her once a week for dinner. I get so tongue-tied about what to talk about. We don't talk about anything. And every Wednesday, I drop her off feeling like I missed the chance to connect to my little girl. I keep thinking it's going to change on its own. It's not going to change on its own. That's why, in reality, we should not be closer at this time. The next Wednesday, he picks up his daughter and says, honey, I was at this event. I learned the most important thing for happiness is not pushing love away. I feel like I've been pushing love away with us. Shows her the worksheet. Explains it to her. She says, Dad, I can see why we should not be closer at this time. We don't have time for superficial chit-chats anymore. We've got to have real conversations. And they made promises to each other that night that brought them closer. That's the paradox. The person who thinks we should be closer has a blind spot. The person who sees in reality we should not be closer at this time has their eyes open. The person who thinks they should see things my way has a blind spot. In reality, they should not see things my way at this time has their eyes open. In The Myth of Stress, you'll see a story of a woman who thought she should weigh less. She thought that was going to drive her to weigh less. It didn't. It didn't work that way. In reality, I should not weigh less at this time opened her eyes. So this is a shortcut to driving change on the things that matter to us without therapy, without stigma, without touchy-feeliness, in just 7 steps. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. If you work on your team dynamics challenges, my team should be more cohesive. He shouldn't micromanage me, whatever it is. This also applies at work, because the most important thing for happiness is not pushing love away. The most important thing for team performance, Google crunched the numbers on this a few years ago. They looked at all their teams. They checked the data on who was performing well. It wasn't talent, it wasn't communication, it wasn't willpower or determination. The thing that was off the charts for the highest performing teams over time is called psychological safety. Where people on a team feel really safe giving feedback, receiving feedback, being vulnerable, normalizing candor and vulnerability across the team, and putting the team first. Maybe you've read Danny Meyer's book on hospitality, and you know what he says is, it's not about putting the customer first, right? It's about putting the team first, because when you put the team first, the customer feels like they come first. But team members can't serve customers or members unless they feel like they're the priority from leadership. And the way to get there isn't with bumper stickers and mantras saying we're a great team. The way to get there is to find the friction in the gears, the challenges between team members. He shouldn't talk to me that way. She should work harder. We should be more organized. You write these down, and you work through them from the inside out by having insights, by using this worksheet. There are executives at firms you know, big leaders who have these in their desks, and they take out a worksheet when they have an issue with their team member. Instead of yelling at each other or blaming each other, they build accountability and honesty from the inside by doing these worksheets on each other. And then they report to their team what they realized, and they build psychological safety so the whole team can do that. If you make a list of all the judgments you have across your club, and if you go further and make your list of judgments about your family, about your community, about your body, and then you start working on those, it will change you. Time won't do it, but working on these things from the inside can. Tomorrow I'm going to build on this by talking about crucibles, which are in leadership studies. I mean, in real life, crucibles are these high temperature vessels that are used to melt metals. But symbolically, they're used in leadership studies to refer to these life experiences of adversity that can destroy us or that can rebuild us. And 2 leadership now one retired and one deceased, but Bob Thomas and Warren Bennis wrote a book called Crucibles of Leadership, where they looked at great leaders around the world, and they saw that great leaders almost universally have these crucibles in their lives, these trials that have tested them. They had cancer, they lost a child, they were in war, something happened that crushed them, that brought them to their knees, but then at the end of it, they found a way through, and it made them more humble and more passionate. You can't just be one, and I'll share a little bit more tomorrow about why that's true. You can't just be passionate, and you can't just be humble. But that combination of both is incredibly powerful and transformational. And we're going to use crucibles in part 2 to talk about these experiences. We're not going to use the word stressors anymore, because as you now know, there's no such thing as a stressor. That word should die. Nothing has the inherent power to provoke stress in us. That word was developed by Hans Selye based on flawed understanding. But we will use the word crucibles because these challenges are real, and they can change you for the better. They can crush you, but they can also change you for the better. And we've all been living through crucibles over these last few years. I mean, some of us would say we've always been living through crucibles. But we can use this worksheet and this framework to become better leaders, better managers, better husbands and wives, better children, better parents, by focusing on the thing that matters most in our thinking to drive change in our behaviors and across our organization. So let me summarize. If you have questions about this, I don't want anyone to get stuck on this where there's some question that you have that prevents you from running with me tomorrow, because tomorrow we're going to do this. We're going to go deeper, and I want us to actually build on this. And I want to give you skills and tools that you can take back to your teams and back to your clubs and completely change the nature of how you work together and maybe change the way that your family connects. So tomorrow is going to be, we're going to lift some weights. But if you've got questions about this, I want you to ask them. We've got a few minutes. First, let me just summarize. So the most important thing for happiness it is money. Up to $75,000, money is meaningful. And then after that, it's no longer money. It's this ability to not push love away. The most important thing for team performance is psychological safety. Stress doesn't come from stressors. We can use the word stress. I don't want you to use the word stressors anymore because nothing has the power to provoke your emotions. It has to do with something in your thinking. And you can use this process to flip a switch in your thinking in just a few minutes without saying a word, without going to a therapist, without doing anything that feels awkward, and turning the lights on in your life, and then teaching by example, your kids, your team members, the people around you. We could also talk about putting this in front of members if that interests you, because most of my work with Merrill Lynch and Morgan Stanley and the financial advisors, a lot of it over the last 2 years has been virtual events for, I'm guessing, a similar client body to your clients, to your members, and the challenges in their lives with intergenerational values differences, with polarization that's ripping up the retired grandparents are conservative, the kids in San Francisco are, and there's a lot of pain in the world right now with differences in our thinking. This process can help, but first I want us to focus on you and your lives. This is a graphic that helps you visualize happiness in life and unhappiness. Remember our asymmetry. The downside, the negative experiences are longer, stickier, stronger. The key to greater net happiness is not higher highs. I'll say that again. The key to greater net happiness is not higher highs. It's not more. It's higher lows. It's having a way of taking the challenges that you've been carrying with you your entire life and working through them so that they're less burdensome to you. This is true for all of us. It's not stress management, though, that helps us with this. So I want to encourage you to focus with me on this again in part 2 and change the way that you approach happiness and that you extend this to the people you care about. Here's some homework. If you get a chance, you don't have to do this on paper, but while you're having a drink tonight or while you're at the pool or you're going to the gym, whatever it is, think about the things that are challenging for you and try to practice converting them into shoulds. He shouldn't this, she should that, I should this. Turning your emotional stress into a should or shouldn't is a really great first exercise for building this skill into your life. And then, if you want to start writing a list of all those shoulds, bring it with you tomorrow because we're going to start working on it. And then we're going to do a couple more worksheets and I'm going to give you more tools so you can go deeper into it. If you have any questions about this, write those down too so we can start tomorrow and make this more interactive. If you have any questions right now that you need to get out of the way before you enjoy a drink later, we have, I think, 5 minutes. So does anyone have any questions about this or experiences, something they want to share, something they want to ask? Sometimes what will happen is people say like, oh, you taught us all this stuff and it completely challenged this belief I had and you never said anything about. This is your big chance. So ask me. You can ask anything and let me know where is this too challenging? Where is this confusing? Any thoughts about this? Or just general questions? Yes.
What about the chemistry of all this? The body produces cortisol and adrenaline and stomach acid.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting that this process shuts that down or counteracts it?
So the question is the chemistry about cortisol, adrenaline, stomach acid. Am I suggesting that this process shuts that down? So the body doesn't automatically produce these hormones as a response to the challenges in our lives, right? So sometimes people will say, what if someone put a gun to my head? Wouldn't I automatically then have the stress response? I was sharing this with a bunch of Navy SEALs a couple years ago, and one of the SEALs said, I can tell you a story about that. He was in Cambodia, he was on an operation, and someone put a gun on, he was in a truck, someone put a gun to his head. And he said, Andy, I can't even tell the story because what happened was so different from what the world would think would happen. Everything got really still. There was no stress. I saw the person, I saw the gun, I listened to his words, and I said, if you shoot me, you're not going to get what you want. Let's talk about this. And they negotiated, and no one was hurt. This person, they negotiated a solution that he understood where the person was coming from. They negotiated a solution that worked for everybody. And he said, I can't tell you what, the training that I had helped me not think in a way that worked against the situation. My mind was clear, no stress. When I go home and my wife or my family don't understand what I do with my life, stress, because I've got all kinds of thoughts about that he didn't know how to deal with. So the hormones are secondary to the thinking, right? If your mind is clear, you won't produce those stress hormones. If you go to the gym happily, you won't produce those stress hormones. If someone forces you to, you will. So the hormones are a little bit of a red herring. The thing to focus on is having a clear head. And if you can keep your mind clear, even in the face of challenges, not only are you healthier for it, because those hormones are harmful to your bodies, but you also have a much greater chance of producing a better outcome for everybody. Right? So clear your head. Don't worry about the hormones. That comes, it's a consequence of confused thinking, I would say. Now, when a tiger's running after you, run. Use the hormones. That's fine. I'm not saying to avoid them all, but we don't have tigers chasing us, most of us. And so we don't want those hormones. We want quiet blood. The less stress we experience, the better. Any other questions? Yes?
So how do you deal with, if you're going through this exercise, if you're going through the steps, but for most, if you're not taking the fish out of the water, you're still your existing paradigm, probably operating in the context of still being right. How do you're saying you're avoiding the touchy-feely or whatever, but there is a component of really need to shift your own, and not just do this as an exercise in your existing paradigm, you need to shift your paradigm to do the exercise.
Correct. Yes. So the question is, I'll paraphrase it, but I said this wasn't going to be touchy-feely, but this is really about shifting your paradigm or challenging your own thinking. And if that is touchy-feely, then this is touchy-feely, because introspection or thinking again about your situation is it's a requirement for doing this. I don't think of introspection or challenging your thinking. To me, that's not touchy-feely. Like the stuff I tried in California with crazy incense, all the stuff to me, that was touchy-feely. But this is just like reflecting and seeing where I may be right or wrong in my assessments of the world. It's what business leaders do when you're looking over your P&L, or you're trying to look at your team dynamics, or understanding your business growth goals. You look at the numbers and you think about it. In this case, we're just applying it to our emotional lives and looking at where I may be off in my assessment of my marriage or with my children. But if you're not willing to challenge your own thinking, if you're not willing to do the work of stopping and checking your math and looking at yourself, then this process is not appropriate. Statistically, 2% of us are sociopaths. Not in this room, but across society, 2% of us lack the ability to have empathy and to reflect on ourselves. The world is to blame. Not me. It has nothing to do with me. It's everyone else's fault. 2% of us, that's how we live our lives. It's a big number. There's 300 million Americans. It's not a non-zero. It's a non-zero number. Hopefully, in leadership, that number is smaller, because it's a real liability. Putting aside the liability as a human being of living that way, it's an enormous liability in leadership to not be willing to stop and think again. Adam Grant wrote a book that came out last year, maybe you saw it, Think Again, about the importance of doing this. It's not a partisan. It's not like, well, Democrats need to think again, or Republicans need to think again, or men need to think again. As humans, we all need to think again. And the more we can destigmatize and normalize that so that we all do this and support each other in doing it, the better it is for everyone. I hope that's not touchy-feely, because it's what we need to be doing more of. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
My question is, what happens if you just don't get there, no matter how many times you try this exercise? What do we do? The term agree to disagree.
Yeah. What happens if you just don't get there no matter how many times you do this exercise and you just agree to disagree? So you're one worksheet in with me. I'm going to ask you to play with this a little bit more tomorrow. And I don't even know that you're referring to yourself. I think in general, we're just asking about, as humans engage with a process like this. In my experience, almost everyone has a hard time in the first few worksheets, because we're trying to move. It's like going to yoga and touching your toes. First time you go to yoga, the teacher says, touch your toes. You can't touch your toes. You don't say, yoga doesn't work. You know that you've got a lot of resistance in your hamstrings. And if you keep going to yoga, you'll work through that. I'm doing the mental equivalent here, where I'm asking you to see why in reality they should not see it your way at this time. I'm asking you to kind of touch your toes. And it's hard. But if you're serious, if you understand that this ties into the most important thing for your happiness into old age, this ties into your leadership performance, this ties into your team's performance, this ties into the happiness of your marriage, the strength of your marriage, and your parenting ability, hopefully that will encourage you to start touching your toes a little bit more often. And after you've done a few more worksheets, it gets easier. We're going to do a couple more tomorrow, and I'm going to give you more tools to go deeper into it. I have met many people over the years who are unwilling to do this for whatever reason. Maybe it's just so foreign to their way of seeing life, they're not going to do it. That's fine. But I've met many, many, many more people who found it hard at first, and then as they started playing with it, they got better at it and saw for themselves how it can have value. So I would just say, take a chance. In the beginning, see if you can put aside your skepticism. Try it with me a couple more times. Ask questions. I'll share stories, and let's see how it goes. Yeah. What if somebody else just won't buy in, right? Like, what if somebody else really needs to do a worksheet, right? Asking for a friend, right? No one. So there's good news and bad news. The bad news is, if you think somebody else needs to do a worksheet, you need to do a worksheet on them. If I think my wife needs to do a worksheet, that's my worksheet, right? Because I'm the one with the problem. Anytime I think somebody else needs to change, I'm the one with the problem first. And so I do a worksheet on my wife or my mother. My mother-in-law is great, I should just say for the record. My mother-in-law is great. My mother, though, oh man, I've done so many worksheets. But I no longer have the luxury of thinking that it's her fault when she does something. Because I've already seen how, from her perspective, relative peak intelligence, like, it makes sense, And so that changes for me the dynamics of accountability and what I do. And then I do my worksheet, and then I have a conversation with that person from understanding, not from anger. Still want to change something, from understanding, and there's a much greater likelihood that that person will hear me. If they refuse to, some people will just refuse to. They're not interested at all. That's fine. We try to contain the damage and avoid the person if we can, or put some sort of boundaries in place. Maybe they'll change. In the meantime, I'm not going to keep hitting my head against a wall and blaming the wall, right? I recognize that this person, for now, is a no. But I don't keep thinking that they shouldn't be, because I can see their childhood, their experiences, whatever brought them there. I keep working on my ability to help shift that. But I've got peace of mind now. Right? My wife doesn't have to change for me to have a happy marriage. Right? My mother doesn't have to change for me to have a happy family. I can see the clarity of where they're coming from and respect it. And so I'm left not pushing love away, and if they find that attractive, maybe they'll ask me. My wife doesn't actually like to do worksheets on paper. She likes to just verbalize it. She'll just say, like, can we just talk through this thing happened at work? We'll just talk through it. But if I lecture her, that won't happen. Right? I want to keep the psychological safety high. We'll see. We're going to do a couple more tomorrow, so we'll see. We'll build on it. I mean, I can't emphasize enough, this isn't like a one-off where you just somehow get it and you're done. It's a skill. This is why I like comparing it to working out. You're not going to be a champion, in the gym or on a bike or in a pool. You have to build skills and efficiency. This worksheet is similar. But being a champion in the gym isn't going to, lead to a happier marriage or better parenting. This can. Yeah. I think I've gone over. So thank you this is part one. Hopefully we're going to continue tomorrow with part two. I really appreciate your time. And Beth, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.